The mornings in Sarah Mitchell's house always began the same way, quiet, careful, controlled. At exactly 6:15 a.m., the alarm would buzz softly on her nightstand. She would reach over, silence it before it could wake Daniel, and sit up slowly, already thinking about the day ahead. Coffee first. Then breakfast. Then making sure everything looked effortless. Because that's what she had trained herself to be, effortless. By 6:30, the kitchen lights glowed warm against the pale Chicago morning. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Sarah moved between the stove and the counter with practiced precision. Eggs, toast, fruit. Daniel liked his breakfast simple. Predictable. Just like their life. Or at least, that's what she believed. She placed his plate on the table, aligning the fork just slightly to the left. It was a small habit, one Daniel had once teased her about. "You're too precise," he had said years ago, smiling as he pulled her into his arms. "Relax a little." Back then, she had laughed. Now, she just adjusted the fork and stepped back. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Daniel entered, already dressed in a crisp suit, his tie hanging loosely around his collar. He looked the same as always, sharp, composed, confident. The kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room. "Morning," Sarah said gently, sliding a cup of coffee toward him. "Morning," he replied, barely glancing up as he reached for his phone. She watched him for a moment. There had been a time when mornings felt different. When he would sit across from her, talk about plans, ask about her day before it even began. Now, his attention lived somewhere behind that screen. "You have another late meeting today?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Daniel took a sip of coffee. "Yeah. Big client. Might run late." "Again?" The words slipped out before she could stop it. He looked up then, a faint crease forming between his brows. "That's what work looks like, Sarah." "I know," she said quickly. "I just meant, you've been busy a lot lately." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced back at his phone, his thumb scrolling absently. "It's temporary," he said finally. "Things will slow down." She nodded, even though something inside her resisted the reassurance. Temporary. That word had been floating around their house for months now. Temporary distance. Temporary stress. Temporary silence. Yet nothing seemed to return to the way it was. Daniel stood, grabbing his jacket. "I've got to go." "So soon?" she asked, surprised. "I told you, early start." He kissed her cheek quickly, already turning toward the door. "Don't wait up tonight." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Sarah stood there for a moment, the quiet settling heavily around her. The coffee on the table was still warm, untouched except for a single sip. She sat down slowly, staring at his empty chair. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when their house felt alive, filled with laughter, conversations that stretched late into the night, plans for the future. Back when Daniel would come home eager to see her, not distracted, not distant. Back when she didn't feel like she was slowly disappearing inside her own life. She shook the thought away and stood up, clearing the table. Dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. People went through phases. Marriages evolved. She had told herself that 100 times. Still, something felt off. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself folding laundry in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft shadows across the floor. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, her mind replayed small moments she couldn't quite ignore. The way Daniel angled his phone away from her. The sudden passwords. The late-night messages that lit up his screen, quickly dismissed. She paused, holding one of his shirts in her hands. "Don't overthink," she murmured to herself. Trust mattered. Doubt could ruin everything. That's what she believed. The sound of her phone buzzing broke the silence. She picked it up, expecting a message from a friend or a reminder. It was Daniel. "Running late. Don't wait up." She stared at the message longer than necessary. No explanation. No detail. Just the same line he had used more often than she cared to admit. Her fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to ask more. Where are you? When will you be home? Instead, she typed, Okay. Take care. She set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Dinner that night was quiet. She ate alone at the table, the ticking clock filling the gaps where conversation used to live. By the time she finished, the house felt too big, too empty. She moved to the living room, turning on the TV for background noise. The voices blurred together, meaningless. Her attention drifted again. At 10:47 p.m., the front door finally opened. Sarah sat up, her heart lifting slightly before she could stop it. You're back. Daniel stepped inside, loosening his tie, his expression unreadable. Yeah. Long day. You look tired, she said, standing. Do you want me to heat something up for you? I already ate. The words landed heavier than they should have. Oh, she said softly. Okay. He walked past her, heading toward the bedroom. Daniel, she called gently. He paused but didn't turn around. Yeah? She hesitated. There were a dozen questions sitting on her tongue, pressing forward, demanding to be heard. Instead, she asked the safest one. Everything okay? For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then he nodded, still not facing her. Yeah. Just work. And then he disappeared down the hallway. Sarah stood there, the distance between them feeling wider than the walls of the house. She knew what she was supposed to do. Trust him. Support him. Be patient. That's what a good wife did. But as she turned off the lights and made her way to the bedroom, a quiet, persistent thought followed her. Something was changing. And whatever it wasn't temporary. That night, as Daniel lay beside her, already asleep, Sarah stared at the ceiling, her mind refusing to rest. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, so familiar, yet somehow distant. Carefully, she turned her head, studying his face in the dim light. He looked the same. Nothing about him had changed on the surface. But she could feel it. A shift. Invisible. Unspoken. Real. She closed her eyes, willing herself to ignore it. Because admitting it, truly admitting it, would mean facing something she wasn't ready to lose. And so, like every night before, Sarah chose silence. Not knowing, it was the very thing that would soon break her. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, settling into the spaces between words, in the pauses that stretched too long, in the way Daniel no longer looked at Sarah when he spoke. For weeks, she told herself it was stress. Work pressure. Life moving too fast. Until the night everything stopped making sense. It was a Thursday. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. The kind of Chicago evening where the wind cut through layers and made even short walks feel endless. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at the clock. 9:42 p.m. Dinner had gone cold hours ago. She picked up her phone, reading Daniel's message again. Meeting ran late. Don't wait up. Her fingers tightened slightly around the device. Something about it felt rehearsed. She exhaled, trying to shake the thought away, but it clung stubbornly. Tonight felt different. He hadn't called. No quick check-in. No explanation beyond the usual line. Just silence. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her coat. I'm just going to check, she whispered to the empty house, as if she needed permission. The drive downtown was tense. Street lights blurred past as her thoughts raced ahead of her. She didn't even know what she expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe exactly what she feared. Daniel's office building loomed ahead, tall and quiet. Most of the lights were off. Her heart sank. She parked across the street, staring up at the dark windows. If he was working late, there should have been something, movement, light, proof. There was nothing. A hollow feeling settled deep in her chest. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. It rang once. Twice. Then went to voicemail. Hi, it's Daniel. Leave a message. She didn't. Instead, she lowered the phone slowly, her mind beginning to connect pieces she had been avoiding for weeks. The late nights. The distance. The way his attention had drifted elsewhere. A sudden memory surfaced, an upscale restaurant not far from here. Daniel had mentioned it once. Said clients liked the place? Without fully deciding, Sarah turned the car and drove. The restaurant glowed warmly against the cold night, its windows alive with soft light and quiet conversation. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Her pulse quickened as she stepped inside. "Table for one?" the hostess asked politely. Sarah hesitated. "I'm actually meeting someone." The lie felt strange, but it gave her a reason to look around. And then she saw him. Daniel sat near the back, his posture relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in months. Across from him was a woman. Young. Effortlessly polished. Her laughter floated lightly across the space between them. Sarah's breath caught. For a moment, everything around her blurred. The voices, the movement, the soft music, none of it mattered. All she could see was him. Not tired. Not stressed. Happy. Her feet moved before she could stop them. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, final. Daniel didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on the woman across from him, leaning in slightly as she spoke. "And then I told him, if you think I'm staying late again, you're crazy," the woman said, laughing. Daniel smiled. A real one. Easy. Unforced. Sarah stopped at the edge of the table. "Daniel!" Her voice cut through the moment like glass. He froze. Slowly he turned. The color drained from his face. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" The question hit harder than it should have. She looked at him, then at the woman, then back again. "I think the better question is..." Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "What are you doing here?" The woman glanced between them, her expression shifting from confusion to discomfort. Daniel stood quickly. "Can you give us a minute?" he said to her. The woman nodded, gathering her purse. She didn't look at Sarah as she walked away. Silence settled over the table. Sarah felt it pressing against her chest. "How long?" she asked quietly. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Sarah, how long?" she repeated, louder this time. He hesitated. That was all the answer she needed. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Was I ever enough for you?" she asked, her voice breaking just slightly. Daniel exhaled sharply, as if the question annoyed him more than it hurt him. "This isn't about you." She let out a hollow laugh. "Of course it is. It's my marriage. My life. I didn't plan this," he said, his tone defensive now. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen, Daniel." Her hands trembled at her sides. "You made choices. Every single day." He looked away. That hurt more than anything. "Say it," she whispered. "Say it out loud." He didn't respond. "Say that you chose her," Sarah insisted. A long pause. Then finally, "I want something different." The words landed like a blow. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing them. "Different," she repeated. Her chest tightened, but her voice grew steadier. "Then be honest for once. Are you leaving?" Daniel met her eyes, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. "Yes." The world seemed to tilt. 16 years of marriage reduced to a single word. "Yes." Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay standing. "And everything we built?" she asked. "Does that mean nothing to you?" He sighed, frustration creeping into his expression. "I can't stay in something that doesn't make me happy." The simplicity of it stunned her. "So that's it," she said softly. "You walk away, and that's supposed to make sense?" "I deserve to be happy, Sarah." There it was. Not regret. Not guilt. Just justification. She stared at him, searching for something, anything, that resembled the man she had loved. But he was gone. Or maybe he had never really been there. Sarah nodded once slowly. "Okay," she said, surprising even herself. Daniel blinked. "Okay?" She straightened slightly, a quiet shift happening within her. "You've made your decision," she continued. Now I'll make mine. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, she said, her voice calm now, you don't get to come back when this stops being exciting. Something flickered across his face, uncertainty maybe. But it vanished just as quickly. I'm not planning to, he replied. The words should have shattered her. Instead, they settled somewhere deep, hardening into something she didn't yet understand. Then we're done, she said. No drama. No pleading. Just truth. Sarah turned and walked away, her steps steady despite the storm raging inside her. She didn't look back. Not when she reached the door. Not when the cold air hit her face. Not even when the tears finally fell. Because deep down she knew. The man she had loved wasn't sitting in that restaurant anymore. And whatever came next, she would have to face it alone. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like evidence. Every corner carried a memory Sarah hadn't asked to revisit. The couch where they used to sit on quiet Sundays. The kitchen table where conversations once flowed without effort. Even the hallway seemed louder now, each step echoing with absence. Daniel's side of the closet was empty. That was the first thing she noticed the morning after. Not messy. Not rushed. Clean. Deliberate. He hadn't just left, he had prepared to disappear. Sarah stood there longer than she should have, her fingers brushing the vacant space where his shirts used to hang. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. So this is real, she whispered. No answer came. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Phone calls had to be made. Papers had to be signed. Words like separation, assets, and legal process entered her life without warning, stripping everything down to cold, manageable terms. But nothing about it felt manageable. One afternoon, Sarah sat across from a lawyer, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Given the circumstances, he said carefully, sliding a document toward her, your financial position may be limited. She frowned. Limited? He's moved a significant portion of assets into accounts that are difficult to access immediately. Her chest tightened. You mean he planned this? The lawyer hesitated. It appears that way. The realization settled slowly, then all at once. Daniel hadn't just walked away emotionally. He had secured his exit. Sarah nodded numbly, signing where she was told, her name looking unfamiliar even to her own eyes. By the time she stepped back outside, the air felt sharper, harder to breathe. Her life wasn't just broken. It had been dismantled. Weeks passed. The house grew quieter, emptier. Bills began to arrive with a consistency that felt almost cruel. Electricity. Mortgage. Insurance. Each envelope carried a number she wasn't sure she could meet. Sarah sat at the kitchen table one evening, a stack of unpaid notices spread out in front of her. She picked one up, scanning it again as if the amount might change. It didn't. Her savings were thinning. Fast. For the first time in years, fear settled deep in her chest, not emotional this time, but practical. Immediate. What am I going to do? She murmured. The question lingered in the air, unanswered. The next morning, she opened her closet and stared at the rows of clothes she rarely wore anymore. Dresses for events that no longer existed. Shoes bought for occasions that felt distant and irrelevant. By afternoon, she had packed several boxes. Selling them felt strange at first. Personal. Almost humiliating. But when the first payment came through, small as it was, something shifted. Not relief. But movement. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Still, it was something she had done. On her own. The loneliness was harder to manage. Friends called at first, their voices filled with sympathy and concern. You'll get through this, one said gently. Let me know if you need anything, said another. But conversations grew shorter over time. Lives moved on. People returned to their routines. Sarah didn't blame them. She just felt left behind. One evening, she found herself sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by bills, receipts, and unopened letters. The TV flickered silently in the background, casting soft light across the space. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of it all. "I don't know how to fix this," she said aloud. Her voice sounded small. For the first time since Daniel left, the tears came without restraint. Not sharp or sudden, but steady. Exhausted. She buried her face in her hands. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered. The question had followed her for weeks, circling endlessly without resolution. Was she not enough? Too predictable? Too comfortable? The thoughts twisted deeper, pulling her further into doubt. After a while, the tears slowed, then stopped. Silence returned. Sarah lifted her head slowly, her eyes falling on the dark screen of the TV. For a moment, she didn't recognize the reflection staring back at her. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, drawn. The spark she once carried, gone. She studied that version of herself, something stirring faintly beneath the exhaustion. "Is this who I am now?" she asked quietly. The question lingered. And for the first time, something inside her pushed back. No. The word came softly, but it was there. Clear. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "No," she repeated, this time with more certainty. Sarah shifted, pulling herself up from the floor. Her legs felt unsteady, but she didn't sit back down. She walked to the mirror in the hallway, stopping in front of it. For a long moment, she simply looked. Not at who she had been. Not at what she had lost. But at what remained. "You're still here," she said under her breath. It wasn't much. But it was something. Her reflection didn't change, but her expression did. Just slightly. Less broken. More aware. She exhaled slowly, the weight on her chest easing just enough to let something new take its place. Determination. Not loud. Not dramatic. But present. Sarah turned away from the mirror and walked back to the living room. The bills were still there. The problems hadn't disappeared. Nothing had been solved. But for the first time, she wasn't looking at them as something that would destroy her. She was looking at them as something she had to face. One step at a time. The next morning, she woke before the alarm. Not out of habit. Out of purpose. The kitchen felt different as she stepped inside. Still quiet, still familiar, but no longer tied to someone else's routine. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, pulling a notebook toward her. For a moment, the page remained blank. Then she picked up a pen. At the top she wrote, "What can I do?" The question felt simple. But it was the first one that mattered. She began listing everything she could think of. Skills. Interests. Possibilities. Most of it felt uncertain, incomplete. Still, she kept going. Because stopping meant going back. And she couldn't afford that anymore. As the sun rose outside, casting light across the table, Sarah leaned back slightly, looking at the page in front of her. It wasn't a solution. Not yet. But it was a start. And for the first time since everything fell apart. That was enough. The notebook stayed open on the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. Sarah read the words she had written, "What can I do?" over and over, as if the answer might appear between the lines. The list beneath it was uneven, uncertain. Skills she hadn't used in years. Interests she had once pushed aside. Nothing looked solid. But one word kept pulling her attention back. Real estate. It wasn't random. Years ago, before life narrowed into routines, she had taken a short course. Not serious. Just curiosity. She remembered enjoying it, the strategy, the independence, the idea of building something tangible. Back then, Daniel had laughed. "Sounds complicated," he had said. "You don't need to worry about that." She had let it go. Now, sitting alone in the quiet kitchen, the memory felt different. Not discouraging. Provoking. "Maybe I should have worried about it," she murmured. The thought didn't scare her. It sharpened something inside her. By noon, she had signed up for an online course. It wasn't a grand decision. No dramatic moment. Just a simple step forward. Still, it felt significant. The first few days were harder than she expected. The material was dense. Terminology she barely remembered resurfaced, layered with concepts that demanded focus. Financing structures. Property valuation. Market trends. Sarah sat at the table late into the night, her laptop open, notes scattered around her. At one point, she leaned back, rubbing her temples. "This is a lot," she admitted quietly. Part of her wanted to close the laptop, to push it aside and retreat into something easier. But easier had already cost her too much. She straightened and hit play on the next lesson. Weeks passed. The routine shifted. Mornings were no longer slow and uncertain. They had direction. Coffee, notes, study sessions. Afternoons spent researching listings, understanding neighborhoods, tracking patterns. She made mistakes. Misread numbers. Misjudged potential. Doubts surfaced often, whispering that she had started too late. One afternoon, she attended a small local property seminar. The room was filled with confident voices, people speaking in terms she was still learning to understand. She sat near the back, listening carefully. During a break, a man approached her, glancing at her notes. "First time here?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah. Just getting started." He smiled politely, though there was a hint of dismissal in it. "It's a tough market. Not exactly beginner-friendly." "I figured," she replied evenly. "You working with someone? A partner, maybe?" "No." He raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." Sarah held his gaze, her voice steady. "So is rebuilding your life." For a moment he didn't respond. Then he gave a short nod and walked away. The exchange stayed with her, not as discouragement, but as confirmation. People would doubt her. That wasn't new. But it didn't have to matter. Her first real opportunity came quietly. A small property listed below market value. Nothing impressive. Outdated interior. Needed work. Most people overlooked it. Sarah didn't. She studied it carefully. Ran the numbers twice. Then again. It wasn't perfect, but it had potential. The risk was clear. So was the possibility. That night, she sat at the table, staring at the figures. "This could fail," she said under her breath. The words hung in the air. Then another thought followed. "Or it could work." She exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long while, the fear didn't stop her. It focused her. The process wasn't smooth. Securing financing took longer than expected. Conversations were tense, filled with skepticism. "Do you have experience in this field?" one lender asked. "Not formally," Sarah admitted. "But I've done the research." "That's not the same thing." "I know," she said calmly. "But it's a start." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the lender sighed. "We'll review your application." It wasn't approval. But it wasn't rejection either. Sarah took it as progress. When the deal finally went through, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. Standing inside the property for the first time, she took in the worn floors, faded walls, and quiet stillness. "This is mine," she said softly. The words carried weight. No one else had done this for her. No one else would fix it for her. It was entirely hers to build, or lose. The weeks that followed tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Contractors didn't always show up on time. Costs fluctuated. Unexpected repairs surfaced, each one threatening to push her over budget. One afternoon, standing in the middle of the half-renovated space, Sarah felt frustration rise sharply. "This isn't going the way it's supposed to," she muttered. A contractor nearby shrugged. "It rarely does." She let out a short breath, then nodded. "Then we adjust." And she did. Step by step. Decision by decision. Not perfectly. But persistently. Slowly, the property began to change. Walls repainted. Floors restored. light returning to spaces that had been dull and neglected. Sarah walked through it one evening, the setting sun casting warm tones across the rooms. It didn't look like the same place anymore. And neither did she. The sale came sooner than she expected. Not a massive profit. But enough. Enough to prove that she could do it. Enough to take the next step. Sitting at her kitchen table again, the same place where everything had once felt uncertain, Sarah reviewed the numbers. This time, her hands didn't shake. "This works," she said quietly. A small smile touched her lips. Not relief. Not luck. Achievement. She didn't stop. One property became two. Two became three. Each one bringing new challenges, new lessons, new confidence. The doubt didn't disappear completely. But it no longer controlled her. Months later, Sarah stood outside another property, larger this time, more ambitious. She studied it carefully, her posture steady, her expression focused. A passing neighbor glanced at her. "You thinking of buying that place?" Sarah nodded. "Big project," he added. She met his gaze, calm and certain. "I've handled worse." He smiled faintly and walked on. Sarah looked back at the house. At the opportunity. At the life she was building piece by piece. There was no audience. No validation. No one watching her succeed. And for the first time, she didn't need anyone to. She took a step forward, already planning the next move. Because this wasn't about proving something to Daniel. It wasn't about revenge. It was about something far more powerful. Control. And she was finally starting to understand how to hold it. By the time the third property sold, Sarah stopped calling it luck. It wasn't chance. It wasn't timing. It was discipline, quiet, consistent, unshakable. The kitchen table where she once sorted unpaid bills now held contracts, spreadsheets, and neatly organized folders. The same space that had witnessed her lowest point had become the center of her control. She preferred it that way. Simple. Grounded. Real. The phone rang mid-morning as she reviewed a set of renovation estimates. Sarah Mitchell speaking. "Hi, this is Kevin from Northside Realty. We received your proposal." She leaned back slightly, her tone steady. "And?" A brief pause. Papers shuffled on the other end. "It's strong. Detailed. You've clearly done your homework." "I always do." Another pause, this one different. "Respect. We'd like to move forward," he said. Sarah allowed herself a small breath. "Send me the final terms." "Already on the way." When the call ended, she didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Momentum was its own reward. Her days had structure now. Mornings started early, not out of habit, but intention. Coffee brewed while she reviewed listings. Emails answered before most people finished breakfast. Meetings scheduled with precision. There was no rush in her movements. No hesitation. Just clarity. By noon, she was standing inside a newly acquired property, discussing timelines with the contractor. "We'll need at least 3 weeks for the full renovation," he said, scanning the space. "2," Sarah replied. He looked at her, surprised. "That's tight." "So is the market window," she said calmly. "We miss it, we lose leverage." He considered that, then nodded slowly. "It'll cost more." "I accounted for that," she replied, handing him a document. "Adjusted budget. Line 3. He glanced down, then back at her. "You've done this before. Enough to know where delays happen." A faint smile crossed his face. "All right. 2 weeks." As he walked off, Sarah turned her attention back to the property. The walls were still unfinished, the floors raw, the air carrying the scent of fresh paint and effort. It reminded her of where she started. Uncertain. Unpolished. Full of potential. Later that evening, she attended a networking event downtown. 6 months ago, she would have avoided rooms like this, crowded, competitive, filled with conversations she wasn't sure she could navigate. Now she moved through it with ease. Not loud. Not showy. Just present. A man approached her near the refreshment table. You're Sarah Mitchell, right? She turned slightly. I am. I've heard about your last 2 projects, he said. Efficient work. Thank you. I didn't expect. He hesitated, choosing his words. Someone new to move that quickly. Sarah met his gaze evenly. I didn't expect either. He laughed softly. Fair enough. They spoke briefly, numbers, trends, possibilities. The conversation stayed sharp, focused. No wasted words. As he walked away, Sarah realized something subtle but important. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. She was simply operating at her level. The new house came later. Not as an indulgence, but as a decision. It sat on a quiet street lined with tall trees, the kind of place that felt settled without being stagnant. Large windows. Clean design. Open space. When she first walked through it, she didn't imagine a life with someone else. She imagined peace. This feels right, she said quietly to the agent. You've earned it, the agent replied. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't see it as something earned. She saw it as something built. Moving in was simple. No unnecessary items. No clutter. Just what she needed. Each room reflected that, intentional, functional, calm. The past didn't follow her here. Not because she forgot it, but because it no longer defined the space she lived in. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Sarah stood by the window in her living room, looking out at the quiet street. The city hummed faintly in the distance, but here, everything felt still. Her phone buzzed softly on the table behind her. She didn't turn immediately. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking in the quiet she had once feared. Now, it felt different. Not empty. Complete. The phone buzzed again. She walked over and glanced at the screen. An unknown number. For a second, she considered ignoring it. Then she picked it up. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. Just long enough to feel intentional. Then a voice. Sarah? Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. She hadn't heard that voice in years. But she recognized it instantly. Daniel. Silence stretched between them, carrying everything that had been left unsaid. You sound. He started, then stopped. She waited. Different. He finished. I am, she replied simply. Another pause. I wasn't sure you'd answer, he said. I almost didn't. That seemed to catch him off guard. I see, he murmured. Sarah leaned lightly against the table, her posture relaxed. What do you want, Daniel? The question was direct. No hesitation. No emotion attached. On the other end, he exhaled slowly. I was hoping we could talk. We're talking. I mean, in person. Her eyes shifted toward the window again, the fading light reflecting faintly against the glass. Why? The word was quiet but firm. Another pause. Longer this time. Because I think I owe you that. Sarah considered the answer. 6 years ago, she would have searched for meaning in his words. Looked for hidden emotion. Hoped for something deeper. Now, she heard them for what they were. Late. Incomplete. Irrelevant. I'm not sure you do, she said. Please, he added quickly. Just one conversation. She closed her eyes briefly, not out of conflict, but calculation. This wasn't about closure. She already had that. This was something else. A return. A request. A shift in direction she hadn't planned for. When she spoke again, her voice remained steady. Fine.